we've heard that the divorce rates increasing, especially since the pandemic, and overall arguments and people not getting along, it's increasing, unfortunately. So how do we handle that? How do we take the strain out of communicating with difficult situations or difficult people? And I called on my good friend, Renee Bauer, who is an award-winning divorce attorney, publisher, published author, and founder of the family law firm Happy Even After, to help us navigate this crazy situation we're in with difficult situations and difficult people. So welcome back to the New Mid, Renee.
Thank you, Michelle. I'm always so happy to be here and chat with you.
Well, Renee, you have fortunately or unfortunately a thriving business as a divorce attorney. You've also started your own movement to empower women to feel more at peace and have more purpose in their new lives. You've seen a lot of difficult situations, to say the least. How have you always been able to handle conflict?
I can't say that I was always good at it. I think, in fact, that this has been such a journey for myself to recognize what my own reaction is and what happens when I am faced with conflicts. I think everyone does this. It's either fight or flight, right? So some people will fight and they're going to put up their dukes when they're faced with conflict, and other people will flee the conflict because they want to avoid it. And I realized myself, I was a flee person. I didn't want, despite being a lawyer, I didn't want conflict. And so in my personal world, whenever I was faced with something that was really uncomfortable and was higher conflict, I would retreat. And I also learned that that was the demise of my first marriage. My contribution to why that marriage didn't work was because I didn't face things head on when they came up, and rather I stuffed them down. And when you stick enough things under the rug, eventually the rug bulks up and you trip over it. So, I think we all have to first just tap into what reaction do you typically have, and then you start to realize how can you use your immediate response and massage that. So it's I think in general, as a divorce lawyer, we see conflict all of the time, and I think that how I was showing up to conflict in my professional world and conflict in the courtroom was very different than how I was dealing with it personally.
Well, interesting that you are a divorce attorney and have been for a while. Do you think that has given you the skills to navigate, your personal life a little bit better? You said that you learned from your first divorce, you were the flight. How has those two worlds helped you progress?
It's funny that you say that, because for a really long time, there was not any overlap. So dealing with conflict as a professional, I would show up in a very different way, and I was very measured, and I couldn't avoid it. I couldn't sweep anything under the rug. I had to face it head on. So I became really comfortable in dealing with conflict every single day in work, and taking it from the approach of, okay, I don't need to get emotional. I can have a measured response to this. I can respond by bringing up facts or pointing out the reason why the other person's argument might be faulty. And then in my personal world, it was completely different. And it really wasn't until my second marriage and divorce, then I started to really turn inward and say, okay, what are the things that I need to work on personally? And my second divorce was not the result of how I dealt with conflict. There were so many other things at play, but I knew going into any other relationship, if I was to, I had to really be true about who I am and the things that made me uncomfortable. And I knew that I had to be able to be really forthright and communicate in a very clear way. It was a gift to myself. It was a gift to the other person. And my current husband and I still laugh about one of our first dates. I sat there and said, okay, I went through a whole checklist. Are you this? Are you this? Are you that? Do you do this? Have this? And he sat there and just answered the questions I was pummeling at him, because I told myself, I'm not going to squeeze myself into a box. I had to be really clear about who I was and what I wanted and what was important to me and what my values were. And that was sometimes a really hard conversation to have as things came up, but I knew that I had to do that for the health of that relationship. And I never have had any regrets. I realized that the more forthright I was, and the more forthcoming, and the more that I had these difficult conversations, that it actually made the relationship that much stronger, because we were able to look at things. And I said, oh my God, I don't have to worry about this other person responding in a really bad way, because the person I'm with is actually respecting what I have to say, even if they're not always agreeing with it, but they respect it. And so I can bring my opinions and my comments and conversations to the table and know that they'll be well received.
Well, I love how you were saying you did the inner work, because you have to do that. You have to go, what's important to you and what is my part in all of this? And I love how you were also saying that when you were at work, you realized you didn't take it personal.
Yeah.
So how can we use that? Because that is a huge, it's easy to take things personally, especially when you're getting into arguments. How do you not take things personally?
So I refer to, there's a guy out there, his name is Bill Eddy. He is a lawyer, he's a licensed therapist. He's written some really good books from the divorce space about how to deal with high conflict people or narcissistic personalities. But I think his teachings are really valuable across any area. Anytime you are dealing with someone, whether it's a coworker or a family member, where there's conflict. And he says to use the BIFF method, BIFF. And it's to keep things brief, to keep it informative, to keep it friendly and firm. And if you approach anything that someone is saying to you, and if it's really emotionally charged and you don't respond in kind with that same energy level, and you remember to keep it brief, informative, friendly, and firm, you're removing the emotion from it. And it's up to us to change the tone of the conversation. And by our own reaction, we can change how the other person responds. And so, you think about one person starts an argument, and this could be your current spouse, and your immediate is like, the feathers go up on your back and you're like jumping right at it and you respond the same way. Well, what happens? Now you're both just talking at each other. No one's listening. No one's trying to understand the other person's point of view, but we have the ability to change. If that first person starts that high emotionally charged argument or discussion, you can actually change the tone of that and respond in a different way. And, like shake your head and say, okay, I hear you, I'm trying to understand, and nod. And, I always say I tell people when they have an ex-spouse that they're trying to co-parent with, and it's really difficult. And they're highly charged and that this person is impossible. They can go just silent for a moment and just simply say, my silence is an acceptance of what you're saying, but I just need time to think about it and I'll get back to you. Remove yourself from that really charged conversation too.
Is there ever a good time, or should you look for a different way to have these conversations? Because if it, possibly you talk about, and when you're talking with your kids, a lot of times they say a good time to have that conversation is when you're driving in the car. Is there ever a good time when you're dealing with a coworker, say at work, or a spouse or a partner? Is there ever a good opportunity or time that you think to have a difficult conversation?
That's a great question. And I would say it's probably not driving in the car. That's probably the worst time. But, I like to, anytime I know I have a really hard conversation that I have to have, and sometimes it's with employees, I like to put a time on the clock and not just show up and bombard the person or buzz them and say, come up, we need to talk. I always like to say, hey, I have something I want to talk to you about. Can we talk tonight at 8 p.m. or at noon, whatever it is, and create some time and space for it, so it's not rushed. And so you're not like having it as you're walking by each other. How often, as like in your home, like something starts and one person's walking out the house and now all of these words are hanging in the air. And like, what do you do with them? Both of you ticked off and, you never were able to really talk about it, but really say, okay, when can we sit down and we won't be interrupted and we can hear each other out to have a conversation? Setting the stage, I think, is so, so important.
Well, it's interesting because we can easily react to things, kind of like that knee-jerk reaction. And a lot of times when we react, we don't necessarily either do or say the things that we would, really want to say. We'd rather respond. So giving that time and space is such a great, great suggestion to do that. You've decided to take on this amazing journey, helping empower women and help them find peace and purpose. What led you to that?
My own two divorces, where I had so much shame and guilt around it, and I felt like such a failure. And I almost stayed in both of them because I was afraid. I was afraid of judgment from others. I was afraid of what family and friends would say. So judgment from people who were closest to me. And I almost made a decision based on all of these external things. That was the catalyst for this, because I said, hey, I'm like, here I am, a professional in the divorce space. Like, I should know better. That I should know that this thing is just like a moment and it's not a whole life defining thing that has happened to you. And yet I still caught myself in that talk. And like, if I'm feeling this, if I've gone through that, imagine all of these people who found themselves thrust in this world of divorce and who aren't in that space. And it's totally new to them. And maybe they're the first one in their families or from their friend circles to get divorced. Like, what is it doing to them? And I just, hearing from clients over the past 20 years make decisions because they were staying in an unhealthy, toxic marriage because they're worried about money or worried about the judgment, really just broke my heart. And I said, we should be making decisions as women. We should be making decisions that are right for us, that could be really hard and really difficult, but are still the right thing, because we believe that we're worth more. We believe we're worthy of a better or a different relationship. And sometimes that means you're leaving a marriage that isn't bad, but it's just not good enough. And, I saw such joy where I am now in my life, having gone through all that I've gone through. And I'm so grateful that I made all of those hard decisions, because I wouldn't be sitting here now. I wouldn't look at my current husband and know that he's the perfect match for me. Doesn't mean that there's perfection, like nothing ever is, but I do know he's the perfect match for me. And knowing, like, had I stayed, I would have been with someone who wasn't that. And I think every single one of us should be living this joyful existence. And if we're not, we have to make really hard decisions sometimes. And maybe it's leaving a marriage or leaving a job or moving or whatever it is, but we all should be doing things, even though it's really hard. And, that was really the root of the work that I do.
How do you make those types of decisions? Like, how have you found yourself to be able to move forward and make a decision? Those are two really big decisions.
So I have a keynote actually on this exact topic. I tell people to really listen to what they actually want. And everyone knows what it is. Everyone knows, like, that thing that lives inside of them. And the problem is we're constantly looking for other people to tell us what we should be doing. And so get really clear on what it is that you want, and like, pay attention, get quiet with it, sit with it. If, for some people it's meditation, for some people it's going for a walk, like whatever it is, however you need that to create that time and space to really become honest about what it is that's keeping you stuck or making you unhappy. And then saying, okay, what's holding me back from moving forward? Usually the things holding us back are fear, ego, external influences, overwhelm, uncertainty, and maybe even journal about all of the things holding you back. And then you can start to say, okay, the only reason why I'm not moving forward is because I have fear, or is because I'm paying attention to other people's opinions. And then I always, we hear all the time, people will say, like, take baby steps towards things. And it's always like, take the baby steps and get the momentum going. And I kind of think differently about that. I think that you take the biggest, boldest action. Like, I think you do the thing that's so big that there's no turning back. And the only way you can go is forward. And, if leaving a job, for example, like, you make that decision that you're leaving this job, you slam the door on that, and then there's no choice but to go forward and watch and see what unfolds. And is it scary? Absolutely. But is it worth it? It absolutely is, because there's only good coming. It doesn't mean it's not going to be hard. It will be, but you're really leaning into the things that live inside of you. And I mean, Michelle, isn't that your story too?
Right. It's burning the ships, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh
Totally.
my gosh. Well, it forces you to do stuff.
Yeah.
Like, you don't have any choice.
Yes. Yeah. It forces you to no longer be like inactive. and
Right.
you are kicked in the like behind to action. And sometimes we need that big kick because those small little baby steps are just not going to cut it.
Well, absolutely. I agree with you. I do. I'm thinking about this a lot different now because it is being bold. Think
Yeah.
about the people who've really made changes in the world.
Yeah.
They've been bold and made big, bold choices and burned
Yeah.
the ships and didn't look back.
Yeah.
So speaking of which, do you have any women mentors, or are there any women that you've looked up to?
Oh my gosh, I am so grateful for the whole community of women around me. And I right now, so if we talk like, okay, who do I really admire? And I Sarah Blakely comes to mind because I was just listening to a podcast interview that she was on yesterday. It was like an hour and a half long, and it was incredible. And it was, so Sarah Blakely, if you don't know, is the founder of Spanx. And she shares on this podcast interview her really scrappy, gritty journey to get from where she was like the butt model for Spanx and like street peddling her wares to where she is now. And so I love hearing a story like that because it's someone who really saw a vision and didn't let anything get in the way. But I also, just around me every single day, I'm just inspired by so many people who are doing the work and are genuinely leading from a really amazing place. Like, I mean, Michelle, you're changing lives. Like I look at you and I say, like, this is incredible. Here's one person who is making an impact on so many lives just by doing what you do. I mean, there's inspiration everywhere around us if we want to see it.
Oh, thank you so much, Renee. Well, you know what? It's wonderful that we are friends because it really does matter who you surround yourself with. Are you surrounding yourself with the people who are going for it? We have ups and downs,
Yeah.
and but we're still moving forward. It might be 2
Yeah.
steps back, but it's 4 steps forward.
Yeah.
So if someone is listening to this right now and getting fired up, which I hope they are, and they're realizing like, okay, I can take on difficult situations. I can take on difficult people, but maybe I'll do that tomorrow. Like maybe they're just kind of kicking the can or having a hard time starting something new. What advice would you give them?
I would say think about the outcome if you started it today. Think about what life looks like a year from now. What's your biggest dream that you have on this thing? And then think about what happens if you don't start it. And just look at the contrast between, like, there's so much more to lose by not starting. And when you kind of put it in that perspective, it's one of the things on that podcast interview I was listening to was Sarah Blakely was sharing with, and I thought this was such a gem, that her father would say to her every single night, what have you failed at today? And if she didn't have something, it was like, hey, you didn't do your job. And, failing is actually a good thing because it means you're moving forward. So don't think about failure as, oh my God, I can't fail at this thing, it's so bad. No, like failing should be happening to us every single day because that means we're showing up to life every single day and putting our egos on the line and, putting ourselves on the line. And I mean, that's so worth it. What happens maybe if you don't fail? What happens? Like that's what's worth it. But there is nobody who doesn't accomplish anything who doesn't fail way more times than they succeed. And so it's just remembering that, like, you're in good company. We're all a bunch of failures.
Oh, gosh. Well, it's all about getting comfortable with being uncomfortable.
Yeah.
So when's a time when you were really uncomfortable and you had to sort of push through a failure?
Oh my goodness. I've been uncomfortable so many times. I mean, my divorces were totally uncomfortable. I just had a moment of complete discomfort actually last week that I'll share. Is I'm in this new space that you know about in a whole tech startup world, and we're pitching venture capitalists. Now, if anyone knows anything about that space, it is so male dominated. And I think like the statistics are like 2% of women are actually in that space. So for all of these calls, I'm the only woman in the room every single time. And I was in this call last week where all of these men were just doing their manly ego, like puffing thing.
Macho. I'll be
And so,
macho man.
yeah, like they were just totally puffing. You had a bunch of them all puffing up on screen. And I had to present a whole marketing strategy. And I was so uncomfortable because I knew they were all looking at me. I had to present way better than any of them had to, because I have to fight for credibility. And it was really, really hard to do. I was so nervous. And we have another call shortly. And so it's, I'm finding myself in this uncomfortable space, but it's like, all right, like now I'm looking at it, like, how do I play with that? Like, how do I have some fun with it? And let's see the stories that can come out of this. Like, that's the way I'm looking at it. And I'm keeping track of them. How many times will I be called young lady? And it's like,
Oh my gosh.
and so, oh no, like that's totally true. So, it's just every single day, it's like I've been saying yes to things, even though they like really scare the crap out of me. But it's an adventure. And that's the way I look at it now.
Do you think it also helps you though, because you started your own law firm, which is pretty bold and it's extremely successful now. And you changed the name from Renee Bauer Family Law Firm to Happy Even After, which you said you even got pushback on that name, right?
Oh yeah. 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 So it was called Bauer Law Group. So like every other lawyer out there, they have their name of their firm is with their own name in it, the law office of, last name, law group, like they're all the same. And I decided to switch the model on its head, and I wanted to slowly extract myself from it, and not be the head person that people called, that they wanted to talk to me. And so I renamed it, and we had so many we had some lawyers who were like, that's great. That's genius. That's awesome. And we had a lot of people saying like, that's like a stupid name. Why would you do that? Law firms aren't called that, and kind of mock it. And that's, the funny thing is, it's like, all right, you can laugh all you want, but our phones are ringing because our messaging is so on point now. And we go straight to the pain point of what people want. They want to be happy. And it's really doing something so different. There's a book that talks all about this, called Play Bigger by Chris Lockhead. And the whole concept is, listen, in order to be really like a king or queen in what you're doing, you have to do something. You have to disrupt what is out there, and don't just show up and do a better version of what someone else has already done. You have to do a completely different version. And that's going to require you to think outside the box. And that's innovation. And that's what drives success. So now I'm always thinking about it. It's like, all right, what's the next thing I can do that's not just better than what I did before or what my competition is doing, but it's completely different.
Oh my gosh, I love that. Well, speaking of completely different, you have an incredible summit coming up for women, right? Can you tell us about it?
Yeah, so it was last October. I was sitting on my couch, and my husband's at one end of the couch and I'm at the other, and I'm scrolling through social media, and I'm looking at all of these women who I follow who like share these empowering messages. And I'm like, it's so cool that there's so many like really awesome, supportive women who I'm friends with and who are in this space. And I'm like, what if we could bring them together and into a live event and create an event that's not a stuffy conference that's all corporate, but like something really fun. And I like, my head popped up and I looked to my husband. I'm like, Jay, I have an idea. And let me tell you, every time I say that, he like braces himself and he's like, yeah, babe, like, what's your idea? With like kind of a half grin. And so I told him it, and he's like, that sounds great. Like maybe in a couple years, like you have a lot on your plate. Well, 2 days later, I had the place booked and half of the speakers like all in. So it is April 30th in Hamden, Connecticut, and it's called the She Who Wins Summit. So we are bringing in some incredible main stage speakers and breakout sessions on everything from finances to leadership to landing a TEDx talk. And it's just a really, really great, like high energy event to bring women together who are supporting each other and to really like inspire and motivate them to like go big and bold and go for their next thing, to really like live a life of joy rather than be stuck in inactivity and stuckness and looking and saying, okay, and having regret later on in their life and saying, well, what if I went for my dream, and like, oh, well, it's too late. So that's the event. And I hope any of your listeners who are interested will reach out.
Great. Yeah. How can they find out about the summit, and how can they contact you?
Yeah, so the website is shewhowins.com /Maine, MAIN, or they can just reach out to me directly and I can send them the link. Tickets are still on sale. I think we still have about 20 tickets left. We sold out of VIP.
Oh, great. Well, I'll have it all in the show notes. So that'll be amazing. Well, Renee, thank you so much for all of your wisdom, for hanging out with me a little bit here on the New Mid.
Thank you, Michelle. It's always such a pleasure to chat with you.